Well, I do something every single day to remind me of the most valuable asset I have. I had a poster made, and I keep it in my office. And it's not a poster of my bank account or even of my family. It's this guy right here. And if you were to come in my office, you would see it. At the top, it's Latin, and I believe Salina used to teach Latin, didn't they? And anyone know what memento mori means in Latin? This is why they stopped teaching Latin. It means remember, memento, remember your death. Mori. Remember your death. This poster has 80 columns or 80 rows down, and each one has 52 boxes in it. So each one going this way horizontally represents 1 week of your life, and each one going down represents 1 year of your life. This is my death chart that I keep in my office. I don't worry, I don't have them available afterwards. You don't have to take one with you. Now, I know that this is weird because when I ordered it, my wife said, "That is weird. Please don't put that in your office." I think it's the greatest thing ever. I come into work every single day and look at my death chart. Now, it only has 80 rows, and some of you are like, "Brother, I'm already well past your death chart." If you go past 80, you get it for free. They'll refund you. So don't worry there. But why do I do this? Why do I keep this? Because I understand that for some it's weird. Others are wondering why. Why would I keep this in my office? I view this as my most important reminder each and every day of my most important asset I have. Time. Time. Time is actually my most important asset. And so I keep a reminder of that on my wall. Our big idea today is this. Time is our most valuable asset, and a gospel mindset demands that we steward it well. Time is our most valuable asset, and a gospel mindset, which is the name of our series that we're in, demands that we steward it well. Now, an asset is something that you have as a resource to you. Something that you own, something that you leverage. A lot of people think of their money or their retirement account or their house or their cars, if they're debt-free, as an asset that you can leverage. You should actually think of your talent, your skills and ability as an asset because you can leverage them for different jobs. If you're a great machinist, for example, if you're very type A and well-organized, that's a skill that you can leverage. It's an asset that you can leverage. Most people, though, do not consider time an asset. It just kind of is. It's just something that floats by in this life. Most people check their bank accounts or their stock holdings regularly, probably not so much this past year on the stock holdings front, but they want to check how that asset is doing. But rarely do I see people actively thinking about their time. Yet, if we consider our life in light of the gospel, what does the gospel say about our life, which is this whole purpose of this series, to reject a worldly mindset and to embrace a gospel mindset? I would argue that a gospel mindset says time is our most valuable asset. Time is easily our most valuable asset. Think about it. It's literally the only thing you're born into this world with. You're not born into this world with clothing or coin, but at some point you can trade some time to get some coin, to maybe buy some clothing. We call that work. Time is the only asset that you also have that is completely diminishing. No matter what, you have less time today than you did yesterday. Now, our hope is that long-term our stock portfolio grows, though it doesn't always do that. But on the whole, you hope it does. You hope that your talent grows over time, whether it's music or auto repair or whatever. But no matter what, all of us have 24 hours less today than we did yesterday. Last year when I filled this in on my 35th birthday, I don't fill it in every week. That might be a little bit much. But when I filled it in on my 35th birthday, I had 1 year less than I did on my 34th. And as I come up in just a few weeks, on my 36th birthday, I'll have to fill in another row. I will have less time. which can make some people feel really, really uncomfortable. It can make some of you feel really selfish, like, this is why I don't like to come to church. I'm wasting my time. I'm listening to this guy. I'm depressed. But what I hope you see today is that the world thinks wildly different than Christians should about time. My guess is that you likely haven't even heard many sermons about time in your past. But I believe that a gospel mindset tells us we should, because what the world says about our time here on this earth and what the gospel tells us about our time here on this earth are very different. There's a series verse that we've been looking at. It's Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Last week, this week, and the next 2 weeks, we're looking at these topics where the world says, hey, think about this really important thing this way. But the gospel says, hey, that is a really important thing, but you might want to think about it this way. And today we're seeking God's wisdom in this area of time. So to begin today, I want to try and show you maybe what does the world think about time? What does the world try and tell you? Because again, sometimes the world's messages are subtle. You don't always see them. And the first one when it comes to time is this. You've likely been told this. You have all the time in the world. Usually when someone starts to want to make moves in their life and make things happen and take deliberate action, there can usually be someone that tells you to pump the brakes and says, hey, you have all the time in the world. It's why a death chart can seem really, really weird to people. The only thing that relates all of us in this room at this point is that all of us will die. And yet I'm the weirdo with a death chart for thinking about it. If I've got Miami Dolphins socks on today, I'm like one fan in here. No one thinks that's weird. You think it's cute and adorable and they're going to lose. But that's one person's thing. The thing that unites all of us is that we're all going to die, but thinking about it or talking about it is weird. It's off-putting. It's wrong. It's why are we bringing down the atmosphere? Because the world has convinced all of us, you've got all the time in the world. There are moments of horror and tragedy when someone passes before, quote, their time, that it kind of wakes us up. It's why some pastors really like the opportunity to preach at a funeral, because people actually listen at funerals, because there's a body there and we're reminded, oh my goodness, tomorrow's not promised. Tomorrow's not promised, and so I have to grapple with this reality that is time. But what happens often is we leave and we fall back into the malaise of life. We go back about our business, wasting our lives away. Your place of employment really wants to convince you that your time is limitless, because they want to convince you to sacrifice as much of your time to them. Hopefully you're doing it in exchange for some good capital, but they really want you to think, hey, you'll have plenty of time for fun and life enjoyment after retirement. You know, when we're done with you. Life is limitless. You have all the time in the world, so just give us your life now, right? They don't usually put it that way. They usually say, hey, we need you Saturday. But that's what they're saying. Life is limitless. You'll have plenty of time for that. We need you to give us more of your time here and now. But what does the gospel mindset tell us? If the world tells us that you have all the time in the world, a gospel mindset tells us that time is limited and valuable. And because of that, it must be stewarded well. This is what the gospel demands of us. How we spend our days matter. How we spend our years matter. How we spend our life matters not just to us, but it matters to God. So how often do you stop and consider, how am I spending my time? Maybe you're grinding away 75 hours a week at the factory, but your kids are growing up and you're missing a lot of their childhood. You should ask yourself, is this how I should be spending my time? Again, I'm not saying maybe you have to for some financial realities, but you should at least ask the question. Maybe you're heavily investing into youth sports. I see that, and this is the season of life my family's in, and I see people around me where they spend all of their free time at a Fleabag Motel in Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati at another tournament. And they easily spend 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a month in youth sports. And how often do you actually step back and consider, is this how I want to spend my time? Oftentimes, it's the frog in the boiling water. This is not an indictment question saying you shouldn't do this. This is the question of, did you actually ask the question, this is how we want to, as a family, spend our time? Or did you just end up at a La Quinta in Cleveland eating a breakfast buffet thinking, how are we here? Right? Because that's what typically happens. Because the world has convinced you, yeah, just kind of go through the motions, do these things, say yes to these things. Maybe you haven't visited mom or dad in a while. Maybe you haven't called that neighbor friend in a while that you love to visit with because you're just too busy. And you know you need to make the time. But have you asked yourself, if they passed away tomorrow, would I regret not taking this time? Here's my point. In a few weeks, we're going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about a worldly mindset with money and versus a gospel mindset with money. And what all of us would agree, that a gospel mindset with money demands we steward it well, right? That if you need to have like a budget, that you need to know how much is coming in and how much is going out if you want to manage your money well. Like money shouldn't be a feel thing. Like you should know how much money you make. You should know what your obligations are. And you should then budget accordingly. You should say, these are my priorities. I'd like to keep the heat on, and I'd like to keep a roof over my head, and I'd like to pay for groceries. So that's literally going to cost you everything at this point. So that's it. But you're going to set your budgets according to that. So why is it, if I asked you how you budget your time, most people would say, I don't even think about it. I would argue that time is your most valuable asset. You likely will die with capital left in the bank. You will die with zero time left. So why is it that we do not budget any of it? Most of us would just say life and time happens around us. I go to work, I come home, I kind of do the chores that need done, I engage this way, maybe I come to church, maybe we've got this, I have a very busy calendar. My hope is that now you're getting what I'm pushing at. I understood when I felt the Lord leading me to discuss this, this is not a normal sermon topic. I've never preached on the topic of time, and my guess is many of you haven't heard a sermon just about time. Because we just don't think about it as a resource that we have to manage, that we have to steward, that we have to consider and think about. But my hope is now that you're actually kind of stepping back and thinking, why don't I steward my time? My time is just a vapor on this earth. Why am I wasting my time in certain ways? Why don't I steward and manage my time the way I do other valuable things? I really need to consider if this is how I want to spend my time doing X, Y, and Z. I hope that you begin to think, I don't know if I want to say yes to this obligation because I have something else I would rather be doing, something I value more highly, and that's what needs time. The world will tell you that you have all of the time in the world. You got all the time in the world, so you don't need to do it. And frankly, if you were a multi-billionaire, I would imagine budgets are less important. You can stand to make a couple $1 million mistake every now and then. That's a rounding error. But if you've got 77 years, which is the average lifespan of a male, less or more, none of us knows. Our days are in the Lord's hands. You would probably want to be really careful with how you spent those moments, where you invested that time, where you put those weeks, years, decades of your life, who you spent it with, how you invested it. So here are some basic questions I want you to ask today. These are just simple. None of this is rocket science, but my guess is, unless you're a death chart weirdo like me, you maybe don't think about some of these things. What would change in your life if you had conversations about time the way a wise money manager discusses wealth? Just what would change? Even if just you had those conversations. I meet with my financial advisor once a year. He talks about me building my wealth for our family a very different way than me because he thinks about wealth in a different way. He's wise in that way. That's why I've hired him, because I'm not gifted in that way. And he talks to me about how we need to diversify funds and how we need to protect against risk and build our wealth in a godly way. What if we talked about time in those same ways? Using our time in certain ways, knowing we can't build more, only knowing that we can steward what we have well now. What would change? What opportunities would you accept or decline? I know that some of you have been in situations where you've said yes to something and then you're doing it and you're like, this is not what I should be doing. This is not how I should be spending my time. This is not my gifting. This is not my area of service, and it's fine, but I should not be spending my time this way. What margin would you gain? Most of us are wasting time in certain areas. So if you started thinking in the same way you would about money, if the second you add a strict budget, you find that you actually had more money than you realized. The second you started to budget your time and think about it as a steward, most of you would gain margin, and how would you steward that extra? It's just basic questions for you to consider. But I think it's important for you to consider. The truth is, all of us have a limited time to make the most impact we can. So how will you do it? So if we could get some extra time, if we gain some more of this valuable asset, how would we steward it? Well, the world will tell you this. This is what the world will tell you. Use it on you. If you've gained that extra time, sounds like you need a boat. Do you like golf? Are you a Disney adult? How's Florida in the winter? Use it on you. Whatever time you can gain, you've earned it. This can look like the person who gets 1 week of vacation and instead of going with their family, they take the hunting trip by themselves. Don't do that. I'm not calling out anyone in particular, but if you get 1 week, shouldn't be like, oh, good, I'm going without the family. It could look like the guy who spends every Saturday morning on the golf course for 5 hours rather than spending time with his family. It can look like people that I know that have to work a side job in addition to their regular job because they have so many hobbies that require all these extra monies and that they want to do these things that they have no time. So they have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week because they're maybe majorly in debt or they've bought all the bells and whistles because they need to have the things. The world will say you should spoil yourself, but what does a gospel mindset say about our time? The gospel mindset tells us that time is our opportunity to serve your family, your church, and your community. A gospel mindset says that our time is our opportunity to serve. That's what time is valuable for to the Lord. It's our opportunity to serve. It's our opportunity to serve our family, our church, and our community. It's a two-step jump for us today. First, I have to get you to even believe that your time is valuable and that you should consider it as something. And that it's not just something you should give away willy-nilly, that you should actually consider where your weeks, where your years are going. But then I need you to consider that beyond that, the gospel calls you to steward those hours back into service. Why? Mark 10:45, one of my favorite verses in the Bible. This is Jesus talking. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many." For even the Son of Man, Jesus says, did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. If there was anyone on this earth who could have said, I have limited time here, you will serve me, it is Jesus Christ. If there was anyone on this earth who said, I deserve to be served, it is Jesus Christ. If there is anyone who came to this earth and said who could have said, it is about me, it is Jesus Christ. And he said, I've come to serve. My limited time will be put into the service of God, will be turned back into stewardship. This, friends, is our call as well from God with our time. The world says use your time on you. God says serve others. First, look for opportunities to serve your family. If you're married, how do you make time for your spouse? How do you serve them to make their life easier? Do you go out of your way using your time to ensure that their life is more blessed? How can you take some of your hours that maybe you would rather spend serving yourself and reinvest those hours in serving your spouse? I would far rather, I'm a millennial, so I grew up with video games. I still love video games. I don't care if you don't like video games. I'm not going to make you play them with me. I love them. I would rather sit in my lazy boy and play video games than give my kids a bath. Confession. Some of you guys might love bath time. I'd rather not do dishes. Not a huge fan of taking out the trash either. You're picking up a theme here. How do you think it's going to go for my marriage and for our overall health of our home if every time Becca needs something, I'm just playing games? It's not going to go well. But it's my time. I work hard. Well, yeah. But I'm going to take some of that time. I'm going to serve my family's needs. I'm going to make sure my kids are clean. Make sure my wife is not carrying all of the load. I'm going to do the dishes when they need done. The world says use it on yourself, but God says look to serve others. There are so many opportunities, and these are little moments in marriage that you could just take time to serve the other person. It might take 5 minutes, it might take 5 hours. It's quiet, it's simple, but it makes an impact. Husbands, if you want to have your wife feel, wow, take the list that you've been waiting 7 years to do, actually do it. Take the time to do it. Take the time that you have. If you have kids in the home, are you looking for opportunities to serve them? And I chuckled to myself when I wrote that because having kids is constant service, it feels like, right? But there's a difference, and parents, hear me out, you know this. There's a difference between the bare minimum of keeping your kids alive, like bath time, like you have to do that. You have to feed them. You have to give them snacks like every 5 minutes, it seems. And then actually investing in them. Actually spending time with them. Actually teaching them the gospel. Actually bringing them up as young men and women. Actually pouring foundational things with them. Talking with them. Playing with them. Being involved in their life. Serving them as you would unto the Lord. The next area we can look to serve is the church. Why would you look to serve this place, though? It can seem self-serving for a pastor to say, hey, would you serve the church? Well, my hope is that you look at this place and you say, this is a mission I want to be a part of. That you would look at this place and say, this is a place I want to give my hours to. This is a place I want to be a part of. Not only does this church minister to my needs, but it's reaching the needs of others, and because of that, I want to be here. And you can serve in many ways around here. Maybe it's up in the band. Maybe it's mowing the lawn. Maybe it's setting up chairs for a meal. Maybe it's holding babies in the nursery. It doesn't matter, but it's about taking opportunities to give to something that's bigger than yourself, to being a part of a mission that's bigger than you. It's saying Jesus came and said, I've come to give my life away in his limited time. So I will use my limited time, even though I might rather be reading a book or sitting on the golf course, because my faith demands, a gospel mindset demands that I use some of my time to serve others. So I will serve my family and I will serve my church so that the gospel can go forth in my community. And I want to be clear, church and community are different here. They're both needed, and I think they're both areas we should look to serve. We serve our community, and often when we serve our community, it's an opportunity to take Jesus with us to those who had never stepped foot inside of a church. It allows us to take a Christ-like ethic into this world, and it will stand out often. Maybe it's with the VFW. Maybe it's with the school system. Maybe it's with a local community organization or charity. Maybe it's just being a great neighbor and being available to help, being the guy or gal that people call when they need a hand. It says that my time is limited and I will still use it to serve others. I will put hours into that. The world tells us to use time on yourself. A gospel mindset tells us that time is our opportunity to serve, and we should look to serve in all ways, our family, our church, our community. And that those hours that the Lord has given us will be returned and reinvested in those ways to the glory of God. I'm going to be honest, I didn't talk about work today because all of you figured out how to serve your employer. You just have. Maybe a few of you need to figure that out. But many of you in here know exactly how to give your employer 40, 50 hours a week. You figured it out. And you have to pay the bills. I get it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But I don't need to really talk about that time. I'm talking about the other hours in the week and where you put them. This week, I'm going to be honest, I was down pretty bad and I was pretty sick. And so I had planned to take this sermon in a very different direction. I had this idea of working through time and helping you see it in this matrix, and I had these slides in my head. And yesterday when I went to sit down and write the sermon and I finally felt well enough, I just kind of chuckled because sometimes we just need basic. And I think sometimes the Lord can use things in our life to keep the pastor from getting into the weeds. And I think this week he used the flu to keep me from getting into the weeds. Because the truth is, most of us just need to grapple with, do I use my time well? Do I consider where it goes? And if I'm not, how can I steward it better? And am I stewarding it to the things that God has called me to put it into? Very basic questions, but they're very important questions because the truth is, all of us have one of these, whether we want to know it or not. And all of us will run out of time. And all of us will stand in front of the judge someday and give an account for the things we've done. How we stewarded our time that he gave us. Did we steward it to serve others, to serve our family, to serve our church, to serve our community? Simple ideas, but not always easy to pull off, especially over the long haul of our life. As a part of this sermon series, last week and this week and hopefully the weeks going forward, I've asked certain people in our congregation to just share part of their testimony as it relates to the sermon. And there's a reason why for that. Sometimes I have a fear that when I can preach, it can feel like a lot of head knowledge. It can feel like, okay, pastor's talking about that, he's got some Bible verses, he's telling me to serve, he's telling me, but I don't really know how that looks in my actual life. I'm not really sure anyone actually does that. Do people really think of their time that way? And so I've been praying through this series, and I was praying through, Lord, who would you want to share about time? And one of our elders came to mind, a gentleman by the name of Randy Danmeyer. Now, Randy's one of the first people I've ever met at Salina First. He's become a dear friend, but brother in the Lord. And Randy, one of his most valuable things, and when I think of Randy, one of his strong suits is I think of steward. A steward. Because of this, Randy knows all things come from God. It's at the core of who he is. And you can't be a steward if you think it's yours. A steward is by definition in charge of something that belongs to someone else. And Randy is someone that's very unique in that he's been at Salina First literally his whole life. He's born and raised in this congregation. He's raised his children in this congregation. Now some of his grandchildren come to this congregation. And he served in many different capacities throughout the year. So I just want to welcome one of our elders, Randy Danmeyer, forward, and he's just going to share a brief word on why and how and what the Lord has laid on his heart of why he's served, why he's used his time and given it back to God. Thanks, Randy.
Well, good morning. I'm not sure. I served on the pastoral search committee when we called Pastor Craig to the church, and we intentionally wanted to seek out a younger, more vibrant pastor to help lead the flock. That was intentional of our group, and I can't remember all the people on the committee, but I'm just one of the people. But in hindsight, basically, the pastor's calling me old this morning. But we wanted a younger pastor to give us a new inspiration, a new vision on the ministry here at church. But in any event, I was born and raised in the church. It's a blessing to have been raised, and the many, many hundreds of mentors and people in the church that would serve. And so I'm just a product, I think, of the body and how the many parts serve the common good. And I don't want to elevate Randy in any way. This isn't about me. It's about the man who died on the cross for me. So I just want to, we used to have a 50-year club here. I don't know those that remember that you get to a point where you kind of get honored that you've been around over 50 years as a member of the church. And it's ironic, this morning our class, the adult class, we just finished a book called Growing Older and Wiser. And ironically, the scripture, one of the scriptures this morning was out of Psalm 71, verse 18 says, Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation. So when I was a youth in the church, it seemed like there was a lot of gray hair in our body, and now I'm one of those gray hairs, but it's refreshing to see all the younger folks that have been attracted to the church, trying to find Jesus and walk with us in that regard. Pastor Craig's been a great resource and help to that end. So I guess I don't know where else to go other than, being raised in the church gives you a whole different perspective. And our first pastor that I can remember here, Pastor Pop Toole, was such an avid Camp Odioka church camp cheerleader. I remember going many years as a youth and actually gave my life to Christ up on Vesper Hill. And many of you can relate to that in your life. So, but I'm not sure, out of a sense of obligation, just an obligation to serve Christ. And so when called, I've been fortunate enough to say yes many times. I haven't always said yes. And all the decisions within the church haven't always gone my way, We in the world think about self so much, and I suffer from that myself. I'm a sinner, saved by grace. But with God's provision, He's able me to be able to continue to serve. And I don't know if there's a retirement date for that service. I kind of doubt it. But anyway, that's what I have to share this morning.
I asked Randy to share, and I know, again, he's like, people of humble nature are like, I don't have anything to say. The thing I love about Randy is you're just as apt to see him in an elders meeting as you are to see him on a mower, to see him on a ladder, to see him doing what needs to be done to keep the church body going, to see him at his grandkids' sporting events, or to serving his family, to doing these things, to just viewing everything in your life that God has given you and stewarding it well. One of the things I'm blessed by as a younger pastor is I have more seasoned elders to serve with. The Bible says gray hair is a crown of glory, guys. But I've seen their lives in different ways. I say, I want that when I get to that point. And each one is different, but I can look at a man like Randy and say, I want to steward what God has given me wisely like that. My goal for you today is to just try and break free from what the world says, that you've got all the time in the world, use it on you, have fun, when God says you have very limited time. Serve me. Serve others. Give your life away, because it will be here and gone. Just 2 weeks ago, Martin Crick laid here as he passed away. I stand and I will do some of your funerals, and maybe you'll come to mine. we will all pass away, whether we want to think about it or not. My hope is that when that moment comes, you'll say, I've used my time well. I did what God called me to do. Because there is so much he's calling for each of us. Let's pray as the worship team comes forward. God in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to just consider this idea. Thank you for the many, many saints, as Randy mentioned, thousands at this point, Lord, that have called Salina First Church of God home, that have made this mission possible and continue to give their life away here, continue to give their life away to their families, continue to give their life away to the community. Lord, help us to be wise stewards of what you've given us. Help us to not take any moment for granted, and help us to see you in the midst of it. Teach us, convict us, help us to grow in these areas. We pray this in Jesus' name.